Hello and welcome to Off the Record. We have a very special episode today. It's raining out, it's pouring, I'm sad inside.
Not in sunny Union City, New Jersey, buddy.
It's coming up to you, man. You're going to get it next. Your power's going to go off just like mine.
Yeah, I doubt it.
Okay.
Below ground power, dog. Modern world we live
Low ground power. Let me just give a very quick mention. If you live in Chicago and you are going to be in Chicago on Friday, come see me do an emo night. It's not trademarked. It's after the Knuckle Puck main Real Friends show. Thank you very much for my plug. Jesse has a book called Get More Fans. That's his plug.
Soon to have another book that I titled as of yesterday.
I saw that you got a great title. You haven't even told me yet.
That's because we just jumped on this. We have to rush because you're a busy man.
I'm a busy man. I'm a busy suit.
Mm-hmm.
This is called Off the Record. You can keep up with us at offtherecord.fm. If you're listening live on Adobe, there's a chance this could be a long show, so you might want to subscribe to us after on iTunes or whatever podcast of choice you have to listen to the full thing, and leave us a review because Jesse needs more happiness in his life.
It's true, I do.
I'm gonna rotate between saying one of us needs happiness and see which week we get more iTunes reviews, just to see who they care about.
Who has more sympathy?
Yeah.
Should I pull the cancer card and say it helps cure cancer?
Hey. Yeah,
Please help my cured cancer.
It's an A/B test, basically.
Nice, but we need the why.
Yeah,
or else it's all bullshit.
That's true. Okay, we have a big show planned today.
We should do well. This isn't follow up, but we wanted to discuss it. Even though this week's show is not going to be about this, we wanted to discuss that All Time Low almost was number one.
All Time Low had the best-selling album in America last week, and they had the number 2 album on Billboard. They sold 75,000 copies sales.
So Zach, explain to the kids, though, why you could have number 2, even if you sold the most.
Because it depends how you sell out. In December of 2014, Billboard changed how their chart works in order to try to modernize themselves. And whether you agree with this or not, they made the change anyway. So previously, well, one more explainer. SoundScan is the company and service that accounts for all record sales and single sales across the country each week. So SoundScan and Billboard SoundScans and Billboard charts used to mirror each other. So if you had the number 1 most selling album on SoundScan, you would have the number 1 album on Billboard. Again, like I was saying, SoundScan only accounts for sales for top sales charts. Billboard's change now factors in with single purchases and streams per album. So if you buy 1,500 copies of a single for an album, that accounts for 1 album sale. Fast and the Furious' soundtrack, great film, was number one last week on Billboard because there is a hit song, like mainstream real hit by Wiz Khalifa, and his streaming and single sales number truly catapulted the Furious 7 soundtrack over All Time Low's Future Hearts. And this is the difference. And people are upset about it. People don't care about it. Doesn't really matter. All Time Low still sold a lot of albums. And
are you upset about it?
No, I think it's fine. They had they sold a lot of records. Ultimately, that's what matters more, you know?
Well, yeah, what I think, because as we've discussed in the past, I actually actively don't like All Time Low. I think what they did was very bad for the punk scene.
What did they do, Jesse?
They like had promo pictures where they're like in bathing suits showing off their hot pecs.
So you meant okay, sorry. I thought you meant
I think it brought this scene to a very lame place, but I am always happy for any band that has an independent team that works scrappy and hard and gets this much success, and I'm psyched for that whenever this happens, because it does help with the democratization of music, and that's what I care about much more than if these dudes are winning over 14-year-old girls with hot pecs.
Hot pecs? Do you have hot pecs? I don't have hot pecs.
I definitely don't have hot pecs. But you know what I want to say? I never thought I'd see the day I'd quote JB Yasta of Hatebreed, but he did have the best tweet about this. Did you see it?
I don't know anything about Hatebreed, if I'm going to be straight with you.
That's actually probably for the best. That means that you're a lot less likely to ever become a mook.
A synergy band may be going on tour with Hatebreed soon, and I'm stoked, I guess, but that's all I know.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, so JB Yasta wrote, All Time Low sells 70,000 records. Gorgot sells 300 this week. It's very clear that 16-year-old girls buy records and metalheads buy weed.
What's Gorgot?
They're like a metal band.
Okay.
Most people would infer that from the story. I didn't actually know who Gorgots was either. I just figured, when he said it's clear metalheads buy weed, I figured that's a metal band.
Right. That's fair. Yeah, weed, all-time low. They'll get there soon. They're fans, I'm sure.
It's true. I mean, like 3 years later, some kid at the show, when they go out
Right.
and they explore, they go to the Man Overboard show and they hear all those songs about smoking the W33D.
Oh my
All of a sudden,
God,
they're
I
going to be
can't
under the
believe you just
influence.
said that.
Then they become meth heads, and then, their lives are ruined because marijuana is a gateway drug, right, Sarah Palin?
Okay. This was supposed to be an episode that many people listen to, but forget it.
So we did want to do some follow-up because there was a lot of news today about Tidal, and we talked a lot about Tidal. Was that last week?
Yes.
Cool. Tidal fired 25 people, including their CEO.
Yes, and replaced him temporarily with a other guy there, and they also they went out of the top 700 list of popular iOS apps. And by the way, if you're below like 100, you're not popular. And it seems like the launch of Tidal actually boosted Spotify audio beats in the app charts and just plummeted Tidal out of existence. And there seemed to be a new string of larger artists like Ben Gibbard who have just come out and have kind of shamed Tidal. So it's kind of interesting.
I think the one thing I'm going to defend Tidal for a second.
Okay.
I see. Now, we all know where creative thought goes to die is Facebook shares of articles. But I saw a lot of people be like, oh, Tidal's dead. While I don't think Tidal is going to be the streaming service that wins, counting them out this early, stranger things have happened. I wouldn't count them out. I think that, what they announced today is that they're going to give access to more indie DIY artists being able to be discovered and things like that. I don't think that they're necessarily going to be the most popular service, but I would not put the fork in them just because they had a terrible launch. But I would also say some people said that about MySpace's Justin Timberlake relaunch, and that was a good joke. So, do we have any other thoughts on Tidal, or should we get into the
Let's get into the
shebang.
meat, the shebang of the show.
What Zach and I have noticed is, speaking of stupid things people share on Facebook, is that what gets talked about more about Spotify on that subject is the myths and stupidity around Spotify. And we wanted to dedicate a show to giving a big picture, so when your friend shares a stupid article about Spotify on Facebook, you can be informed instead of listening to the stupid bullshit they're saying.
Yes, because we're always right, and your friend is most certainly wrong.
It's probably because they're reading the dumb articles their other friends shared on Facebook.
Yeah. And so what we're going to do, we have a bunch of stuff we want to talk about. We'll include notes in the show notes. Jesse will maybe even write something that includes math on it that will go up on my website with a link to this episode. So we want you to come along with us as we discuss several points and links and articles and thought experiments and catalogs and things. How was that? That
was wondrous.
Okay.
It's like you're getting good at this podcast.
I know. So, Jesse, did you know Spotify is worth a lot of money?
It's apparently worth more than the whole music business.
Spotify is currently valued at $8.4 billion as calculated by the Wall Street Journal, based on an upcoming $400+ million capital round. And the U.S.-based recording valuation for the industry is currently valued at $6.9 billion. So Spotify is apparently valued at $1.5 billion more dollars than the recorded music industry in the U.S. as a whole. For those very quickly that don't understand much about valuation and companies who have IPO'd or not IPO'd, Spotify is a startup. Startups often take monies from investors. That does not mean that Spotify has $8.4 billion of money in the bank or assets or anything like that. But depending on how much money a company takes to be invested in, that raises their valuation as a company as a whole. So based on much more than $400 million of investment, Spotify is valued at $8.4 billion based on stock. That's a pretty significant number. Spotify is referred to as a unicorn, and for tech investments, only so many companies are worth more than one or valued more than $1 billion, and Spotify is valued at $8.4 billion. So that's a lot of money. And this naturally was a great sharing tidbit because it's like, wow, the music industry is a disaster. Spotify is everything, I guess.
What I think that there's two interesting points to this is that one, we often hear that tech's in a bubble. And while I do kind of side with the people that say that we're not in a bubble, what is becoming very increasingly clear, and this happened like Slack CEO. So Slack is an app Zach and I use. It's a chat app for businesses that you can basically do planning, and then it's searchable, and it's really good for keeping everybody communicated that's working on a project. Slack got valued at such a high valuation that their CEO even was like, this is stupid. And that's the big thing we're starting to see is that, yes, tech companies are getting these huge valuations, but there is a reason for that, is because what they're building is about to be so valuable. It's crazy. And so one of the things I think people don't get, and so to just kind of get a little bit into the weeds here, is that people are like, Spotify is not making money. They just had to get $400 million more dollars to stay afloat and everything. But what the big potential everybody sees is that Spotify is getting such insane analytics and demographical information about young people that they're going to be able to become a rival to Google Ads and how well they can target kids. Say to a brand, hey, you want Wiz Khalifa fans to drink your vitamin water drink, advertise on Wiz Khalifa's playlists and on his radio and on his channel. That's one of the big reasons that people who are like, well, streaming services are never going to make money are, one, kind of fools. And then two, why you're seeing these huge valuations is that people see the potential for how much income this can bring in.
Yeah. Naturally, though, one tool being larger than the music industry in valuation has set many people like in a tithy. Is that a proper word? Tithy?
Yeah, I don't know if it's a word. I don't know if that's the one that you should be using right now.
It has set people on fire and anxiety, and people have now sorry. It is. People are saying this has only pushed people to share how awful Spotify is because it seems like the enemy to many people because many musicians are claiming that they're not making any money. So how could a service be valued more? And as we'll talk about as this episode goes on, there's a general loss of understanding and context for a lot of these claims from musicians, from record labels, from pundits, from Jesse, from me, from the world. But there's luckily a lot of information came out in the past week or two, right, Jesse?
Well, the reason we decided to do this episode is I think finally some of the light got shed where it became more comfortable to see that some of these, there's better explainers from people that know who are able to start explaining to you why we see so much stupid information about Spotify. But I think you said something that we should back up on and before we get there and try to explain to people. So you will see some of your favorite musicians rant against streaming music. But my biggest thing is no one's come up with a better answer to combat piracy. And it's proven that things like Spotify and Netflix and these on-demand jukeboxes have decreased piracy and put money back into something that was bleeding and started to at least stop the bleeding somewhat. Mm-hmm. And I know it personally is that I always will fully admit I was a huge torrenter. And it is so rare I torrent something. In fact, the stupidest thing is I pay for cable, and the only time I torrent something is when I go on my on-demand and a show I like Bill Maher or John Oliver isn't up yet. I have to torrent it even though I'm paying to see those shows.
Yep.
So we should say Spotify is the best solution anybody's come up with to stop piracy, and it was necessary. If you listen to the people who say, well, music needs to have value, music needs this, that's a lovely ideal, but the only way, you can't just say this deserves this, you need to make it valued. And this is
we
the
should
step
say
we
that
have.
Spotify very much seems to be, while it may not have all the subscribers in the world and that there's room for competition, like there are millions of people now that are paying for music. Yes, they're not paying singles, and maybe a good portion of them would pay for albums digitally, but maybe a large portion of them would not. And I think it's really important to just, comprehend that, like, the game of streaming is nowhere near optimized yet, right? Like, we're still, like, if you ask, your dad, and your dad is a typical human being that's old-ish, he probably does not know what Spotify is. 3 years into iTunes, if you asked a parent what iTunes was or what a MP3 was, they also probably didn't know, if they even know now. It
Yes.
takes a long time to recognize, to get a kind of, culturally wide accepted new technology. And streaming is the clearly like the evolution of buying something from iTunes. And that means we're only a few years into this with Spotify right now, but they already have millions of people paying for their service and millions of more people that are being exposed to ads for or about music. And some of that trickles back down to artists. So while I don't think everything is perfect here, I do think we're in the very beginning portions, and we're already seeing that some music is coming back instead of being torrented.
Yeah. And I think to get into some of your dad metaphor, I should also say this. You and I are not here just to defend Spotify, and that's not what this is going to be for the rest of the show. There is some serious problems here, and we'll get into those too, but there does have to be a defense against some of the stupidity that happens here. I also want to say the other thing about judging Spotify right now, and you see a lot of this, is people say, this is never going to be profitable, this is never going to work, this is never. This is like judging a 3-year-old and saying whether they're going to be the greatest quarterback of all time. They could get into meth, or they could go to the gym every day and become the best quarterback. There could be a world war and they go off to army and everything collapses and none of this happens. There's a lot of things that can happen, and judging at this earliest stage, just as we were kind of saying with Tidal, it's really a fool's game. And if you see somebody doing that, really question that fool.
Yeah. I just like it's really exciting to me, like whether it's Spotify or any of these services or Apple or whatever, like it's exciting to me that there's already success and it's still so early. Unlike when iTunes launched, like you could really only buy digital music cohesively through them. But, what's interesting with the present is that there's 15 streaming services between Spotify, Rdio, Tidal, Beats, Xbox Music, Google Play, etc. And we're just seeing so much exposure and so much effort and competition, and that's ultimately good for everyone.
Yes, agreed. So let's get into the biggest, stupidest thing we see posted around Facebook and the Twitter sphere, which is that artists aren't getting paid by Spotify.
Did you know an artist has never seen a single dollar for Spotify and they're getting robbed and that they should sue?
I heard they're going so far that Spotify camps out under your bed and then jumps out like the boogeyman in the middle of the night.
My gosh, that is frightening. I'm so glad I'm not an artist after all.
I mean, I'd be pretty scared of Sean Parker's haircut, too, if it jumped up at me.
Yeah.
That shit's rough, dog.
Yeah. So it turns out people do get paid. It's always so striking to me. I manage several bands. Some of them have independent music distributed through TuneCore or other services. And I have friends who are similar. And I've seen thousands to tens of thousands of dollars of income through Spotify. Spotify alone doesn't count of Rdio, doesn't count for Deezer overseas, doesn't count for Xbox, etc. So apparently I am the only person aware that music is, that you can make money on streaming, right? Like, do you think I'm the only one who has bands making money with streaming services, or no?
I have a feeling that you're not the only one making it, because I don't think that they'd see pop punk as the most charitable music to be charitable to.
Huh? That is wild. So in the show notes, there will be a link to an article from Billboard called "The Baffling and Slightly Insane World of Streaming Payments Explained." And so in this post, they kind of comically,
they roast Jeff Barrow from Portishead.
Did you know there's a band called Portishead?
One of my favorite bands. Jeff Barrow is one of my favorite producers of all time.
What does this band sound like? I feel like they're a metal band.
Oh, God, you're so off. Portishead were like this creepy, like, they're kind of like a one of a kind. There's no one who sounds like Portishead. It's very cool. Now, back in the late 90s when I was coming up as a punk, it used to be the joke that every punk kid, when he tried to romance a normal girl, he'd put on the Portishead record and be like, yeah, girl, what's up?
Can you see how Portishead sounds like a metal band to me?
Oh, jeez. They were kind of like, they replaced the Smiths as the band you put on to impress a girl.
Oh, wow, that's what they sound like? Okay.
No, they sound nothing like this. Portishead sounds like nothing else. It's like hip hop beats, but like really old and creepy and weird sounding. It's really awesome stuff. They're one of my favorite bands of all time. Jeff Barrow is a producer, has done the Horrors, he's done the Quakers. He's a killer producer, but sadly,
Are these all band names?
yeah. There's stuff cool kids listen to, not old.
But
old men who
regardless,
pretend to be young.
your boy Jeff Burrow is not too smart sometimes on social media.
We should also say this though. I put the blame on services and labels too. Now,
Okay, let's put some more context around this because we haven't. So in this article by Billboard, they embed a tweet from Jeff of Portishead where he goes, 34 million streams, income after tax, £1,700. Thank you, Apple, YouTube, Spotify, and especially Universal Music Group for selling our music so cheaply. So, for more context, Jeff is the singer of Portishead is essentially saying our music was streamed.
He's not the singer; he's the producer.
Oh, the producer of Portishead was streamed 34 million times, potentially just in one accounting period, but we don't know that. It was streamed 34 million times, and for those 34 million times, this one individual was paid £1,700 after tax. £1,700 is about $2,500 American. So if you read that, that sounds pretty controversial, right? If that's all you know about the music industry, that sounds insane, right?
It's true,
but it's not insane.
Mm-hmm.
And should we go through this a little bit?
Yeah. So let's break down that royalty figure that we pulled up.
Okay.
So
you take this one away.
Yeah, Spotify pays famously less than a penny per stream you get. So, but of that less than a penny, so it's technically about an eighth of a penny. So it's almost a penny. Of that eighth, the majority goes to licensed use of master. So you go, okay, break that down for me. That's basically, I'm going to send that check to the record label. Now, here's where it gets even crazier. So that's the majority of this payment. So if you get down and add another zero from that, so a thousandth of a penny, 30. This is rough, Zach, because I'm supposed to be the one who's good at math.
Why don't you do 0.00? Like explain.
Yes. Okay. 0.0003 is the writers and the publisher's performance royalty. So both the writer and the publisher then get sent that. So as you can see, that is barely even near a penny, which is why you start to get this. And then there's one other royalty, which is the streaming mechanical royalty, which mechanical royalties are kind of like in the past, the CDs, that's the portion of, it's kind of like to say that you're getting a portion of the sales of the song, not the writing or the publishing or the performance royalty. That's the sale of the song. So you have that. So that's 0.0058. I didn't even do that right. 0.00058 of that penny. So as you can see,
it's complicated.
If you're getting one of those other two things, the one that's not getting sent to your record label before your recoupment, which is another thing we'll get into, that's a really low royalty. Now, some of the reason that royalty exists is because songwriters in the past, with radio, we've discussed this on a previous episode, but so on radio, the songwriters who gets paid, and the person who performs it gets paid. So think of it this way. You hear a radio hit song and you hear it from a band, let's say it's Paramore. The drummer, guitarist, bassist, if they didn't write that song, I think one of them does in Paramore, so don't get technical on me for this example. The performers of that song don't get paid for radio play. The trade-off when we made digital royalties was now the writers would get less and the performers would get some of it. That makes everything a little bit more tricky in this. So there's almost like a trade-off in the way the royalties are done now in streaming services, that the performers are getting something, whereas the songwriters are getting less than they used to get. So this is why you see Pharrell getting mad about Happy be getting so low. Now, Pharrell also has to deal with the fact that when he's getting paid from his record label, the record label is going to take money from recoupment. Now, we've gotten into recoupment as well, but to give you a quick thing, if the record company spends $100,000 promoting your song and you make only $106,000, there's $6,000 for you to split up with the record label. So as we know with pop songs, they spend an exorbitant amount of money to promote these pop songs. And a lot of time the recoupment fees are really, really low at first. And then 10 years from now, when they're no longer pushing that song, that's when you really start to see the long tail of that. You had this mega big song, and it keeps getting played on the radio for years to come and being performed and covered. And that's how you get the royalties, is that there's much more of this long tail to how a big, huge song pays off for you these days.
Right. And so I really like this Billboard article as much as I sometimes cannot stand Billboard. I really like this Billboard article because it does a good job at breaking down just how many things go into music royalties and why someone might have only been paid £1,700 for 34 million streams. So if Jesse will give me a moment here, let's think of some numbers. Let's say that I made let's say that Spotify paid Bad Timing Records $10,000 over the course of 4 months, which is a royalty period for Bad Timing, over the course of 4 months for streams by one band. So $10,000, that's a good chunk of money. Let's say that there are 4 members of the band. Bad Timing Records does 50-50 deals. This is something we'll probably talk more about on a future episode. Bad Timing Records does 50-50 deals. So, in a perfect world where there are no expenses for anything, Bad Timing Records would get paid $5,000, and the band that we signed would get paid $5,000. But that is not necessarily how the world works, is it, Jesse? There's more. The world is not perfect, unfortunately. Jesse is old, and I'm getting there, and
You just act old.
I just act old.
Listen to Dad Rock.
Yeah. Death Cab. What if I spent more than $1 on the band that we signed? They may not see $5,000. And so what do I mean by that? Bands cost money. So Bad Timing Records, we pay for recording, we pay for artwork, we pay for advertising, we pay distribution fees, et cetera, et cetera. Maybe we bought you a plane ticket so you could go overseas to tour, and we said that we would account that into your royalties. So in order for bands to make money off of music sold, they have to recoup their costs. So let's say that the manufacturing of this band that we signed, let's say all that and the promotion and publicity, it cost $5,000. We have $5,000 of expenses. If the only income that we made from our band was $10,000 from Spotify, well, that means there were $5,000 of expenses, which means that for this royalty period, we would only have $5,000 of profit. Split that up 2 ways, that's $2,500 per side. If the band splits their money equally, $2,500 divided by 4 is $625. Jesse, how did they only make $625 if they had so many streams?
I just can't figure this out because there's multiple income streams, just like any other business, but musicians went into music because they don't like to do math like you.
And so you understand what I just said there, right? That adds a little more clarity.
Yes.
And so what's interesting enough, and I have a just Jesse, Portishead has been a band for a while, right?
It's like 94, 96.
So you would imagine in over 20 years, Jeff had probably heard of an income statement, a royalty statement, profit and loss, something. He's probably been exposed.
Truth be told, I'm pretty sure, as I remember, dude likes to smoke a lot of weed. So
sure.
maybe you just can't see it through the smoke.
Me too. Yeah. So look, if you're listening, like 34 million streams is a lot. And you know what? Portishead made a lot of money from those streams. But we don't know the kind of deal Portishead signed. Let me also mention that Bad Timing Records does 50-50 deals. Major labels don't. The band may only be seeing 18% of profit. So 18% of $10,000 is not a lot of money. I mean, it's some money, but
Zach's
it's
going to avoid doing the math on that too.
What? Isn't it?
It's $1,800.
Yeah, it's not a lot of money. It's $1,800. And if you split that up 4 ways, that's like not much either. That's a couple $100s per person.
So that's another thing you hit on that we got to explain too, is that we also have to remember these royalties get split up amongst any of the other songwriters or your band if it's a performance royalty, how many people played on. Hey, Portishead has a record with an orchestra. What if they're splitting that all those ways, even though I'm sure they signed
Oh my God, wait, why don't you think that this Jeff guy put any of this in context?
Yes.
Like, I don't understand.
Well, so here's the other thing, too, that's very, very weird about this, is Spotify gets all this bad publicity, yet If I was Spotify, I'd be sending every record company letters and stuff to set stuff those checks with that explain all this stuff to the bands.
Education,
Yeah, like
Jesse.
they are some silly motherfuckers. But it's also because they're too busy having weddings in the redwood forest and destroying the environment and doing tons of coke and having crazy parties.
Oh, that sounds so much better than our life.
Yes, totes. I hope to never go to the redwood forest again. Anyway, but that's part of me. While we want to say dumb musicians, because I say dumb musicians all day. It's also dumb Spotify dumb streaming services dumb labels. They're getting so much shit on. And let's also keep in mind, which brings us to another one of these subjects. The major labels all own portions of these streaming services.
Oh.
What's bad for Spotify is bad for the major labels because they own huge stakes in them. So there's another thing people don't realize, which is the investors into all these streaming services are the major labels. And as these streaming services make money, they make money. Here's another fun conflict of interest part. Dr. Dre and Jimmy Iovine own a ton of Interscope Records. Whole lot of shares there. Vivo, your favorite way to watch a Beyonce video? Warner Brothers Records kind of started that.
Wait, are you saying that major labels have an interest in these companies doing well?
It's almost like the game is rigged.
Holy shit. This is a conspiracy. How has no one ever talked about this before? Is it just us? Is no one else listening? We might get killed. We might get killed for this.
What if the Illuminati comes and shakes us like that weird guy in the mask on the last Game of Thrones?
Are you fucking with me, man? I didn't see it yet, man.
After all, Sean Parker is married to Daenerys Targaryen on Game of Thrones, right?
Is that? Oh, you're right. That broke my heart. I blocked it out.
I'm not attracted to her, so that's easy.
Oh.
Yeah, I'm not into it, man. That's not my type of girl, man. But they got married in the Redwood Forest, dude. It was crazy. Anyway, back to not insulting people about their silly weddings and frivolous spending.
Socialist.
Yes, I am a socialist. One of the things that we also got into about this major label corruption is we uncovered this thing called the black box. So the black box is your friend if you want pilots to get fired who are drinking on the job, since it tapes them when they're in the airport cockpit. It is not your friend if you're an independent artist. So this black box is a thing. So famously, music has really bad metadata. So what metadata is this thing Zach types in all day. Actually, why don't you explain, since you have to do this all the time?
Metadata is a really awful thing where you input countless information, countless steps of information, so that it can be tracked everywhere. And when I say terrible, I really just mean arduous. So whenever I upload a new release to come out, there's, of course, the song name, there's the album artist, etc. But then there's more. What year did it come out? Who owns the copyright? Who owns the publishing? What are the ISRCs? What is an ISRC, you ask? That's great. That's the social security number for each individual song. Then I have to give the UPC. What's a UPC? It's a barcode number. And a barcode number is different on digital, physical, and vinyl. That means every song has one ISRC, but has multiple barcode numbers depending on what kind of format it's on. All of this, Jesse, is metadata. And to have music properly accounted for, allocated, statistically relevant, all the metadata needs to be perfect. Is that a good explanation?
Yes. And so the sad thing is the metadata is not perfect. So this article uses the example of Jay and Bay's Crazy in Love song. So what they basically say is this song can get mislabeled so many different ways. And then all these songs that are kind of mislabeled and they can't get to the right metadata to account for it, all that money goes into a black box. And then what happens is the major labels and they divvy up that money. So the Indian DIY artists, though, don't get that money because they don't got the stakes to negotiate for it. This is why we like unions in America, just for FYI. Anyway, what sadly happens is now the major labels, they have, with their huge negotiating power, because they have this huge conflict of interest where they own some of the company, they say, hey, by the way, for that investment, you're going to make sure anything that goes unaccounted goes into my pockets.
Making money is like just stealing candy from artists.
There's a great saying I was once told: the best way to make money in the music business is to exploit the dreams of musicians.
Oh God, I love exploitation.
Spoken like a true capitalist, Zach. Next on our carnival of horrors, now that we know why all these royalties go wrong, and we should also say this too. You know what's very interesting? to get back to the royalty thing, so Zach, for example, uses TuneCore, which is what any DIY artist that's willing to plunk down some money uses to upload their music.
Thank you for calling me DIY.
Yeah, you're kind of.
We use TuneCore and Big Fancy Distribution ADA.
Yes. So with TuneCore, you can see exactly which services are paying you what, and the royalty rates are very transparent. Musicians, when they get statements from their labels, do not always see, because the labels don't want to sit around typing out accounting statements, who they got it from. They just see a blanket thing. Like, if you're lucky, you're going to see CDs, vinyl, and then digital. And now digital covers Spotify and iTunes. But some of them are nice enough to pass along all the data and see. But sadly, because this doesn't happen, it comes to another thing where you see all these kids on labels saying, oh my God, this is a travesty. Spotify is robbing people. You can't just charge $10 a month, da-da-da-da. Let's get into the truth about, can you just charge $10 a month, and is this okay? Here's a fun statistic. So we do a little bit of math. That eighth of a penny means that you need to listen to a song 84 times for it to be the equivalent of what a person who bought an iTunes download of that song is. So what I mean is this. When you buy an iTunes download, and let's say the artist is DIY and they're just getting a straight cut of it, they get 67 cents from that 99-cent download. In order to get up to that much money for them to be compensated the way that they used to when you'd buy a record on iTunes, you have to listen to a song 84 times.
That's a lot.
Yeah, and you and I have been discussing this a lot, and we want to get into something with this. There's not a lot of songs I listen to 84 times. Unless they're Blink-182 songs. Yeah, well, I think it's funny is, yes, there's some of my favorite records of all time, and obviously those are some of your favorite records of all time, but I did an interesting thing, which is what everybody can do too. So if you go into your iTunes, and I'm going to look at mine while I do this, so I tell you how to do it right, and you select that you want to see the plays field on your iTunes. Or you can even go to that playlist, 25 most played.
Well, all right. So you go to if you're on the current iTunes in the current system of Yosemite, you go to My Music on the top right. You hit the drop down, you go into songs, and there should be a last played field. And if there's not, you can hit Option click and add it in.
So you could also go to that 25 most played thing and then click edit and then click, let's say, 2,000 items. And you can see how many songs you've listened to that have gotten over 84 plays. Funny enough, Zach, I see that my most played song is Kesha TikTok.
Are you fucking kidding me?
It's because I left it on repeat while I was mixing once. I think I left it on repeat for like a week and left the studio.
You disgust me.
But so I really thought about this, and I started to look at my iTunes at how many records I have. I don't use iTunes much anymore, so I can't see, but like the 1975 record's the only one I've had in the last 2 years that's crossed every song 84 times.
Wow. Yeah, over my life, like I have listened to the Blink songs a million times. I've listened to like Paramore, New Found Glory. Like they're a band. Like I've listened to songs 84 times, many songs, but. Think about like a news song, right? Like we get so much music now. It's rare that we listen to like a record that you loved from when you were 16 to 25 and still listen to today. Like you're probably not going to find too many new records over the course of the rest of your life where you listen to it endlessly, right? New music. You agree? Disagree?
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. I think that's the other thing is we're bombarded with so much music now that it's hard to get up to that. Like I think about how much I love like a record like on The Impossible Past or the Menzingers or something like that. And then I look at that because I've only mostly listened to that on iTunes. And I look at it and I'm like, yeah, that's only at 73 times for most of the songs.
Yep.
And that's crazy to me because I feel like I've listened to that record a lot. It makes me sad that they're not even getting compensated, that 99-cent download. I should back up on that 99-cent download thing. One thing we have to also remember is so people then talk about the glory days of CDs. One of the nice things about getting that $6.67 for an album or 67 cents for a single thing from iTunes is we do have to remember that there's no hardware, shipping, a lot of the production costs go way down these days. Records are cheaper to make. And you don't have to print up CDs, vinyl, and have that physical packaging. So $6.67 is actually kind of close to what people were paid in best case scenario for CDs and vinyl throughout time. Best case scenario. Some would have to actually say that that is a much more generous portion than what has happened before.
Yeah, and something that I really want to like say again is that every artist has a different deal. Like if you're an independent artist uploading something from TuneCore, then you're going to see 100% of that streaming money. It may be a penny, it may be $10, it may be $1,000. If you've signed to an independent or a major label, you may have a 50-50 deal, you may have a 70-30 deal, you might have a percentage of a percentage. Like every person has a different deal. And beyond that, there are different expenses that every label has for every band. And really beyond that, depending on how many band members you have and depending on how you split music up, royalties are different every time for every band.
Yeah.
It's really important to remember that in context when you read a message about how iTunes has destroyed the industry, how Spotify has destroyed the music industry, how Apple in a month will be destroying the music industry with their new service. Everything needs perspective, and I don't think many of us have gotten to see the actual perspective on this.
Yes. So to get back to what I think is a greater thing, so we talk about that $10 a month for Spotify, or so some people would say it's free, and then there's some services that are going lower. So Spotify is subsidizing this because people are not paying into the music. And the reason they need $400 million, they got to keep paying them checks to the labels and compensating artists with this thing because they're not getting enough income. So my question becomes then is how many times... So actually, I'm going to back up even a little bit. The big problem with buying CDs in a store in the pre-internet era, if you weren't old enough to experience this and you didn't have the miserable childhood I did, is that you'd hear a song or you'd hear the buzz about a record or you'd read a review, you'd go buy that record, you get it home and you go, this is terrible. And at the worst years, so like in 1999 to 2004, you'd have spent around $18 to $21 on that CD a lot of the time.
Oof.
For a record you don't even like. And that started to feel very unfair to people, and that's what made Napster appealing. So then we got to the opposite end of the spectrum where you started to not have to pay a single dollar to hear songs, and now we can, Stereo Gum or Property of Zach puts up a record for streaming. So, and then you preview it, and then you don't have to do it. Or you just listen to it, and now with streaming services, maybe you just listen to ads in between it. But so, let's say you do want to pay artists. I think the biggest question about artist compensation is when do we feel like is a fair rate, and how many times should you listen to something before you paid a fair royalty?
And do we? I'm with you. I think
so. Is it 6 times? Is it 20? Like, what do we feel this is? Because I don't think anybody thinks 84 times to give what we've considered was fair in the last 10 years fair, and then we'll discuss whether that is fair or not.
But to me, I wonder if every service forever will abide by these same rules that we set. If we Jesse if we were given the power today to make this rule for Spotify, would Rdio do the same? Would Beats do the same?
Here's a fun fact. If let's say you brought this from 6 to 84, every musician and every label would pull out of the other services. Every artist with any control over their catalog. Here's a great example. The Eagles have a good enough contract to pull their stuff out. I had to listen to an Eagles song, which made me want to blow my brains out. Ugh. Worst band ever. But I was mixing for a client, and so I checked it out. The Eagles don't even come up as a listing on Rdio because they've pulled out so thoroughly.
That's good protection.
Yeah. Great joke. Anyway, but every artist, if you were giving them, let's do a little math. 6 times is 20 times better than what Spotify is paying. When you say Spotify, we should also say Spotify, Radio, Rdio, Beats, all these services, Tidal, they're all paying pretty similar. It's pennies, not even pennies difference, micro pennies.
Legitimately terrifying how much math is going on in this episode.
Yeah.
So I agree, but I do wonder, like, if there are 100 million people paying for Spotify and only 1 million people paying for another streaming service, that streaming service is going to have a lot of power with how they pay their artists. Don't you agree?
That streaming service is going to have a lot of power, but here's the thing is it will force a hand if that other streaming service can really get to that number. Now, how you get to that number is rough, because how do you convince other people to pay enough more into it? This is going to have to be a seriously slimmed down business model, et cetera, in order for it to work.
Business models. Ugh.
Yeah.
I agree. So I don't know what a fair number is. 84, that's a number right there, Jesse.
Yeah, that is when I read that math, it like I'm not kidding you, like my heart sank when I did that math the first time. I did it like 2 years ago, and it really like it hurts.
You're probably never going to see royalties for your remix band. What's the name again?
yeah, that's not happening. So let's get into a more terrifying aspect of it. There's this concept called inflation. Do the kiddies know what inflation is, Zach?
What did the president say?
Probably not. So inflation is how much the cost of living and cost of goods increases. So as you probably know this, and hopefully you learned in 5th grade math class while Zach was sleeping.
I never slept in school. I just wasn't very good at it.
That makes one of us. Anyway, so in 1986, what $1 was worth is not what $1 is worth now. Perhaps you've experienced this at the candy store over time, that maybe when you were 6 and you went to buy your favorite Kit Kat bar, the Kit Kat bar was 50 cents, and then it was 65 cents everywhere over time. That's inflation. So if you consider the peak of the music business, 1984, how much would a record cost now? $37.
$37, Jesse. I don't even want to pay a streaming service. How am I going to pay $37 for one record?
For one record. So that if we go into right before Napster ruined everything for everybody and Sean Parker's hair made every major label person cry, $25.91. So you want to hear scary? So let's call it that. Let's call it 1999, the peak of the music industry. It was just about the peak of how expensive records were for the cost of goods of making them. That is the peak. I shouldn't say just about. You'd have to listen to a song 350 times at the present royalty rate to get it to that.
Oh my God. Music is terrible. We should all quit.
It's pretty dark, right? So the real answer is that, yeah, it can't be this low of a rate. Now, Spotify says, which is true, which is that they're giving away somewhere in the area of 70%. They call it 80, but when you look at the math, it's really around 70 that they're giving away of their profits to the musicians. So how do you get this up? Pretty much their only way to do it is either 1, keep fucking musicians, or 2, fuck them even more, or 3, the profit model has to change, or 4, charge you more money. So the whole thing with Spotify is they're trying to get you addicted to this streaming service. They're trying to say, it's the same thing with Netflix. If you think Netflix is going to be $7.99 forever, I would love the crack you're smoking because it must be blissful.
Didn't we just laugh, though, at Tidal trying to charge $20 for a plan a month?
Because it's not the right time yet. So here's the thing about being an addict. It's a great example. I was saying this to somebody the other day.
Like whenever Blink-182 puts a seasonal shirt up, I buy it.
Well, yes, that's that. But here's a great thing. You know that in the last 15 years, the price of cigarettes has went up 6.5 times in New York City.
Cancer's a bitch.
It's disgusting. But so I quit smoking 17 years ago, and cigarettes in New York were $2.
Whew, Jesse, you should have bought them and saved them. I'm sure they would have. I'm sure they would have stayed. You know.
And now it's usually about $12, $14 a pack. From that standpoint, when somebody's addicted to cigarettes, they keep paying this rising price. And when you're addicted to the convenience of having any song you've ever wanted on your phone, and let's also talk about this. $20 is 2 records that you were buying before. It's a pretty easy thing. But now we say this, but it is so hard to get people to adapt to buying music. Here's a great example. One of my friends is 23. She literally hasn't bought music in 7 years. So since she was 16 years old, because she's like, why? I've had Pandora. There's no need or illegal downloading.
Dude, the millennials.
Fuck you, millennials. You're all terrible. You're ruining this world.
That's like the average. That's not a music person, right? We always talk about how
she's a music person.
But we talk about how, like, you and I, we're not the core person in a lot of what we talk about, right? We pay for things.
It's just music's still very important to her, but it's important not the way it is you and I.
Right, but like music can still be really important to you, but that doesn't mean you're going to plop down $8 to try each new streaming service, you know?
Yes. Or pay $100 for me to have all of them at once so I can just play around like an idiot for podcasts.
Right. And so it's the job of Spotify and Apple and Google, etc., to get everyone that loves or even marginally likes music to begin paying for music. And they have deemed that the best and easiest way to do this has been to get that individual to pay $5 to $15 a month. And I
Yes.
think it's slowly working.
Yes, and that's the key, is you do that. It's very similar to what they do with crack in New Jack City, where they're trying to get the crack addicts made. Wesley Snipes' crack thing turns to Pookie, Chris Rock's character, and he gives it free, that it's a little bit more, and it's a little bit more. They're just turning us into crack addicts.
I am a crack addict, certainly.
Anyway, one of the things we didn't get into with this inflation thing is that's another side of this that's a disturbing thing to think about, is that the cost of living with this inflation has went up so much, and musicians' compensation hasn't gone up with it, and it keeps getting worse. Ever since the Reagan era, where we had this idea of trickle-down economics come into being, the rich have been getting richer and the poor have been getting poorer.
My dad just had a heart attack.
Yes. There's nothing factually wrong with that. Reagan was about trickle-down economics. I'm not saying anything that's not biased at all.
Jesse, the facts do not matter in politics.
Okay. The rich have gotten richer, the poor have gotten poorer. Both sides agree with this. Republicans are campaigning on this just as Democrats are right now. That is an indisputable fact. With that, because we haven't been giving musicians as much money, musicians are struggling harder and harder these days. There's two things that go into that, which is one, everybody's talking about raising the minimum wage right now. Raising the minimum wage puts more people into a place where they can buy frivolous things. Regardless whether we like it or not, music is a frivolous cost. It is a want, not a need. A need is food and shelter. Wants are music. Some would argue you'd be miserable without music, but it is a want. So putting more money into people's pockets, having them have more money to spend, and beginning to even out that the rich have gotten richer and the poor have gotten poorer spectrum by raising the minimum wage does help to get this so more people are willing to do this. But secondly, it really does become a thing of that, when we talk about raising the price of these things, is we have to figure out how musicians get more of a living wage and how we get more income streams. Now, we're all hoping these Spotify ads will help to do that and help to raise this royalty thing, but it has yet to be seen. It's a known unknown, as Mr. Rumsfeld would like to call it.
A known unknown.
Mm-hmm.
That's my new phrase.
It's a really good phrase.
Yeah.
I mean, it's amazing such a demonic man made it.
Well, music. That's what we're talking about today. Do you think, so there's a few kind of paths of what we've been talking about. Do you think in the next year or two that musicians will become more abrasive or more open and less angry and spouting ignorance about streaming services?
Do you think people will spread this podcast and link it when their friends write dumb things on Facebook?
No.
All right, we're fucked.
Ah, you're supposed to be the happy one.
I try.
I'm a tortured child. You're supposed to be the realistic, happy. I guess that's not too realistic. So, the next year or two could be really interesting, depending on if Apple does the right service and gets it open to the right amount of people. We're going to see, streaming numbers like boom, and we might really see digital music plummet, especially if Apple knocks it out of the park. By the way, Apple wants to do this. Apple wants it. Apple is very good at cannibalizing its own business.
Apple's also not very good at being concerned for artists being compensated.
Also very fair. But yeah, I mean, that's just fair. That's accurate. So what I'm saying though, if Apple believes that streaming is the future, Apple will cannibalize its music download buys. They will always have it there, but seriously, the iPod was Apple's bestseller ever. They said, fuck it, let's make an iPhone and risk everything. This is what Apple does. This is what they always do. So if Apple's going to do it right, we're going to go from seeing tens of millions of people to potentially hundreds of millions of people across the world sign up to streaming services and be paying X dollars a month and tens of dollars a year to streaming services. And this is going to be a big change in royalties and sales. And I imagine we're going to see a lot of complaining over the next couple of years.
Yeah, I think that there's going to still be this because Spotify is not going to get smart enough to do this. They're just doing a dumb blog that kind of explains this stuff. But I think the other thing too is though, and honestly, what does scare me when we talk about this inflation thing is I really don't know that the value of a record is going to keep going up. And now another thing we should discuss with this is, so we talked about the $35 record. And then somebody's wisely going to tweet at us and say, hey, that $30 Lord record you always talk about at Urban Outfitters, what about that? so much of that is going to Urban Outfitters' pocket that is not a traditional $30 record.
That's what we
When
call a
record stores-
markup.
Yes. So like the $35 record we were talking about would be in a chain like, let's say, Newberry Comics for you New Englanders or a Vintage Vinyl for your New Jerseyers. And they are getting a very traditional markup of, 40% at best on the CD from a distributor cost. So we really can't call that being the same thing and say that, and we've had this is Urban Outfitters helping music discussion before. I think I still have a stomach ache from it. That's not the answer, I should say.
That is not the answer. I wanted to actually mention one other thing. I read, I never ended up linking it on the website, but I read this article on Billboard about Avicii's manager and about how he views Spotify. And I've never heard a more similar perspective on Spotify from such like a large and, important figure with lots of money to worry about. To me, I'm very aware that the bands I work with are not Jay-Z. They're not this dude from Portishead, and they're also not a little small band. They're somewhere in the great in-between of the diverse music scene. And bands work like Knuckle Puck, Have Mercy, Sorority Noise, Real Friends, Citizen, Modern Baseball. These bands all make money from a lot more things other than music. I wish musicians made millions of dollars from every album they release, but it's not practical, and that's a bummer. But it's okay. It's okay because the touring business is the best it's been in years. It's okay because the merch business is the best it's been in years. And to me, Spotify is the best advertising tool and marketing tool around. You can literally see what your friends are listening to, and you can say, oh, I want to fit in. Let me check this out. Oh my God, I just found my new favorite band. It's an incredible marketing tool that unfortunately has not always existed, but it exists now. And if my bands make $1,000 or $10,000 from streaming in a year, that's great. But you know what? If they have tens of thousands of people listening to them, I think a good amount of those people are going to fall in love with the band, come to their shows several times a year, buy those tickets and buy merch. And we're going to see money from that. And that's really important. And Avicii's manager took the same perspective where it's just about marketing and exposure. Like you hear people all the time about like businesses like, well, we got to get more exposure, more name recognition across the country. That's what Spotify is. And it's great.
This is a lot of the premise of my book, which is that your biggest problem as a musician is obscurity. Until you become Metallica or U2, and then your biggest problem becomes how you find the people who already know about you and remind you that you exist after you took 3-4 years off. Until you're that big that you're like the Killers or Coldplay or whoever, your biggest problem is that people don't know who you are and there's potential fans to reach out to. And there is no doubt about it that right now Spotify is the best way on earth for other people to hear about you.
Yeah. And this is like, I don't know. I see my friend Eric like just be like, I found 10 new bands and I think I love them all today.
Wow. I wish I had that problem.
Like this is like a lot of my friends, I see this happen all the time and it's incredible. Like I'm jealous because I'm jaded and washed up, but this is great. Like there's more music. Everyone fights about or argues about, oh, it's so hard to get discovered. I'm seeing more people discover music now than ever.
It's true. The democratization of music is at its best phase now, and it's only going to get better.
Yeah, and like that's important. And sometimes in the long run, a lot of times in the long run, that's a lot more important than making a little more money up front. I always say with some of the bands I work with, like, let's opt for less money now to have a longer and healthier career,
Oh yeah.
It may suck making rent this month, or not, buying 3 more packs of cigarettes, but like, let's make this a career for you. And that means taking full advantage of the tools that you have in hand,
Well put. So with that, do you have anything else?
I don't know. I feel like I gave my heart to it right there. And I feel like
I think that's where we close.
Yeah. Wow. I'm a poet.
So do you have any recommendations? So we're both going to recommend something.
Okay.
And it's going to be very cop and suit.
Oh, God.
Read the articles we linked in this. Get informed. And when people write dumb things on your Facebook and on your Twitter. Share the show, share articles, and let's start debating real things and start talking about how we get musicians paid and move past the stupid falsehoods.
Can I say something?
Yeah.
Let's save the music industry.
Yes!
Thank you all for listening. You can keep up with us at offtherecord.fm. If you're on Adobe and listening to us and wondering, man, who is Jesse Cannon? Why is he so jaded and broken? You can subscribe to us on iTunes and check out all the more things that we talk about at offtherecord.fm. We're going to have links for this episode where you can read up and educate yourself and your friends that are not as smart as you. And that will make us all happier inside. Make us all happier inside. Make us all happier inside.